The Keddy murders. On the night of April 11, 1981, Glenna Sharp, known as Sue, nestled into cabin 28 at the Keddy Resort in rural California with her young children. The 36-year-old mother had moved her family to this isolated spot, searching for safety and a new beginning after escaping a toxic relationship. The quiet resort featured small rental cabins scattered among towering pine trees, offering cheap housing, but also eerie isolation. That night, Sue's 15-year-old son, John, invited his 17-year-old friend, Dana Winggate, to stay over. Her 12-year-old daughter, Tina, was also inside, while 3 younger boys slept soundly in the next room. Sometime between late evening and the early hours of April 12th, a dark figure slipped into cabin 28. The horrific scene discovered the next morning revealed that Sue, John, and Dana had been bound with medical tape and household cords. The killer used multiple weapons, including a heavy hammer and sharp kitchen knives. The tight bindings suggested cold calculation, as medical tape was not something normally kept inside the rustic cabin. The weapons were a chilling mix of tools brought to the scene and items grabbed inside, suggesting the killer planned some details while desperately improvising the rest. Despite the sheer violence that unfolded in the living room, the 3 young boys sleeping in the bedroom next door were left untouched, claiming they heard nothing during the night. This baffling detail would haunt investigators who struggled to comprehend how such brutality failed to wake the sleeping children. When one of the boys woke up to the nightmare and found the bodies, he fled to a nearby cabin for help. But little Tina was nowhere to be found. Her sudden disappearance added a terrifying twist to the mystery. 3 years and 11 days later, on April 22nd, 1984, a bottle collector stumbled upon skeletal remains in Camp 18, located roughly 75 miles away from KDI. Dental records tragically confirmed the remains belonged to young Tina. The remote spot where she lay suggested her body had been dumped there deliberately, though the dark details of how she ended up in those woods remained a total mystery. From the start, the hunt for the killer faced massive roadblocks. The crime scene was compromised as several people walked straight through cabin 28 before forensics could fully secure and document the evidence. Plumas County detectives gathered whatever physical evidence survived, including the bloody weapons and tight bindings, trying to salvage any trace DNA. Still, the heavily contaminated scene made forensic testing a nightmare. They lifted fingerprints from various surfaces, but the primitive technology of the early 1980s severely limited their findings. Soon, one crucial witness took center stage in the case: Justin Smart, one of the young boys who slept through the horrific night. Justin was a friend of Sue's son and had merely been staying over at the cabin. Years later, he agreed to undergo hypnosis, hoping to unlock memories buried deep in his subconscious. Under trance, his detailed descriptions helped artists create composite sketches of 2 potential suspects. He recalled seeing 2 men, one with a moustache and another clean-shaven, though the scientific reliability of memories recovered under hypnosis is highly debated. Investigators focused their suspicion on Martin S.M. and his friend John Bubaid, neighbors living right next door. Martin's wife Marilyn was close friends with Sue Sharp, tying the 2 households together in a tragic web. Detectives soon learned that Martin had made disturbing comments and acted highly erratic in the days following the murders. Then, in 2013, a detective digging through old Plumas County Sheriff files made a shocking discovery. It was a forgotten letter sent by Martin to his wife Marilyn, overlooked for decades, which contained the chilling line, "I have paid the price of your love, and now I have bought it with 4 people's lives." This unfinished, cryptic letter left police wondering if it was a direct confession or just a bizarre, unrelated note. John Bobede, who was crashing with the couple back then, also became a prime suspect in the case. Police interrogated both men repeatedly, picking apart their weak alibis. Yet, without solid physical evidence to tie them to the cabin, no charges could be filed. The trail went cold, and both suspects eventually packed up and left town. Martin passed away in 2000, and Bubaid died in 1988, both dying long before DNA testing could offer any real answers. In 2016, a hammer pulled from a pond near the cabin was sent off for forensic testing. Given where the pond was located, it seemed highly possible the killer threw the weapon into the water after the attack. Forensic DNA testing on the hammer in 2018 uncovered genetic material, but the breakthrough led to 0 arrests. Between years spent underwater and the risk of contamination, the degraded DNA sample proved incredibly difficult for experts to interpret. How did an intruder slip inside without waking the family? And why were the 3 boys next door left completely untouched? Joshua Maddux. On May 8, 2008, 18-year-old Joshua Maddux left his Woodland Park home in Colorado, expecting a brief walk. Friends remembered him as a highly creative, quiet young man. Joshua had just finished school and was trying to find his footing in the world. He loved art and music, and those close to him said he always marched to his own beat. That chilly spring morning, he headed out in just a light jacket, promising his family he would be right back. Joshua never returned. His panicked family quickly filed a missing person report, prompting local police to launch a search. The tight-knit community of Woodland Park quickly mobilized teams of volunteers to scour the nearby mountain trails and thick forests. Days soon dragged into weeks, then months, without a single trace of Joshua. His family passed out flyers, kept searching the woods, and cooperated closely with detectives to chase down every lead. Local news ran the story, but no credible sightings ever came to light. 7 years later, in August 2015, a demolition crew arrived at an abandoned cabin on Thunderhead Lane to clear it. The derelict wooden cabin had stood empty for decades and was finally slated to be destroyed. As the crew started tearing down the walls, they found something horrific inside the chimney, a mummified body, jammed head first. The remains were wedged tightly in the narrow flue, compressed by years spent in that tight space. Strangely, the body was barely clothed, and several garments were discovered discarded near the base of the hearth. Dental records and forensic testing soon confirmed the deceased was indeed Joshua Maddux, finally giving his grieving family some closure, even as it sparked a horrifying mystery of how he ended up there. How the body was positioned raised red flags right away. He was found wearing nothing but a thermal undershirt. Strangely, his pants, socks, and shoes were sitting folded neatly inside the room, right by the fireplace, making the theory that he crawled into the chimney from the cold roof outside seem completely impossible. The abandoned structure stood right near his usual hiking paths, meaning he could easily have stumbled across it that day. The flue measured just 8 by 17 inches. An entry from above seemed blocked by a heavy steel rebar mesh that the owner claimed was welded shut to keep intruders out. The autopsy offered very few answers. Because of the mummified state and time past, finding an exact cause of death was virtually impossible. The skeleton showed no obvious signs of physical struggle or broken bones, but soft tissue wounds were long gone, and toxicology screens came back entirely inconclusive due to severe decomposition. Authorities ruled the manner of death undetermined, leaving the haunting possibility of foul play wide open. As investigators dug deeper, they realized several locals had reported bizarre activity at that very cabin over the years. Neighbors reported seeing strange figures lurking nearby, or finding the front door left wide open on a supposedly vacant property. Tragically, those complaints were never linked to the teen's disappearance until his body was finally pulled from the chimney. The police's failure to search the cabin sooner left Joshua's family feeling deeply frustrated and betrayed. The core question haunting detectives and his family is incredibly simple, yet completely impossible to answer. How did he get inside? Believing it was an accident means accepting he voluntarily took off his pants and shoes, scaled the roof of a random cabin, and wedged himself down a dark shaft barely wider than his own shoulders. Darker theories point to a second person's involvement, perhaps hiding him there after a crime took place. Today, the investigation stays open, though clues have entirely dried up. Was he forced down that narrow space by a killer? Or was it a tragic, fatal mistake during an urban exploration? The Sodder family, Christmas Eve 1945, should have been a warm, joyful holiday for them in Fayetteville, West Virginia. Today, let's look at George and Jenny Sodder, who built a life in America after immigrating from Italy, raising 10 children. That night, 9 of those children were home, while their oldest brother was away serving in the military. Earlier that Christmas Eve, the family had celebrated together, and by 10 that evening, most had drifted off to sleep. At 12:30 in the morning, a strange phone call woke Jenny, followed shortly by a heavy thud on the roof. By 1:30, she woke again to the thick smell of smoke, only to discover the growing fire. Flames were already ripping through the lower floor, quickly climbing the stairs toward the second level where most of the kids lay sleeping. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children scrambled out of doors and windows. some leaping from the second story to escape, huddled on the freezing lawn. The survivors frantically screamed into the dark for the others, but 5 were still trapped inside. Morris, 14, Martha, 12, Lewis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5. All 5 were asleep upstairs. Despite the desperate cries echoing from the lawn, no faces appeared at the windows, and no voices called back. George tried to claw his way up to the bedrooms, but he was driven back by searing heat and thick, choking smoke. The stairwell was completely engulfed in flames, blocking the only path upstairs and turning any hope of an indoor rescue into an absolute impossibility. Running outside, George looked for the heavy ladder normally kept against the wall, but it was completely gone. Next, he ran to his 2 trucks, planning to park them close and climb on top to reach the windows. But neither vehicle would start, even though both had run perfectly the day before. Shockingly, the local fire department wasn't even notified for over 7 hours, and by the time they finally arrived, the entire house had collapsed into the basement. Chief F.J. Morris and his crew sifted through the ashes once they cooled down. Their search of the ruins yielded absolutely no human remains. Chief Morris reported finding no bones, no teeth, nor any physical proof of death. This complete lack of evidence struck the Sodders and their neighbors as deeply troubling. Fire experts and crematorium directors would later point out that house fires, even incredibly hot ones, rarely cremate bodies so thoroughly that absolutely nothing is left behind. Bone fragments and teeth almost always survive even the most intense fires. Suspicious, George Sodder launched his own investigation. He recalled an insurance salesman who had threatened him months earlier, warning that his house would go up in smoke. The warning followed a massive argument about Benito Mussolini, as George had been fiercely vocal in criticizing the dictator. He also learned that the local fire chief had been involved in selling their property to them, and later bought up the very land where their home once stood, raising serious questions. Then, strange witness accounts started coming forward, deepening the mystery even further. A woman staying at a hotel 50 miles from Fayetteville reported seeing the 5 youngsters with several adults at a rest stop on December 25th. Another person claimed they saw the missing siblings being loaded into a car heading toward Charleston early that day. Fire Chief F.J. Morris later admitted he had planted a beef liver in the ruins, burying it in a box at the site, in a desperate attempt to give the family closure and close the case. George hired a private investigator, and the family put up a billboard along Route 60, displaying photos of the missing 5 and offering a huge reward. That billboard remained standing for decades. Then, in 1968, a letter postmarked from Kentucky arrived. Inside was a photo of a young man resembling Lewis, with a cryptic note, "Lewis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Elil Boys, a 9132. The family hired another detective to track the photo down, but he vanished completely without ever filing a report or returning their cash. George passed in 1969, and Jenny in 1989, both without ever learning what truly happened. Today, the surviving family members still refuse to stop searching for answers. The most popular theory among skeptics is that the devastating fire was deliberately set to cover up a targeted kidnapping, perhaps tied to George's open criticism of Mussolini and local mob figures who backed the Italian regime. Did they escape the fire only to be taken? What do you and I think really happened on that freezing Christmas morning? The Hinterkaifeck murders. The isolated Gruber family farm at Hinterkaifeck, 43 miles north of Munich, became a scene of absolute horror in 1922. Andreas Gruber was 63 years old and managed the farm with his 72-year-old wife, Cecilia. Also living on the property were their widowed 35-year-old daughter, Victoria, and her 2 young children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. On March 31st, 1922, a new maid named Maria Baumgartner arrived for her first day. The previous maid had quit 6 months prior, convinced the farmhouse was haunted. In the days leading up to that date, Andreas discovered strange footprints leading from the dark woods to the machine house, where someone had picked the door lock. Despite a thorough search of the property, he found nobody. Yet, he still heard heavy footsteps echoing from the attic, and those mysterious tracks from the forest only led inward, but they never led back out, meaning someone had arrived and remained hidden. Along with the heavy footsteps in the attic, Andreas discovered a strange Munich newspaper that none of them had ever seen before. It was a paper the family did not buy, and one the mailman never delivered. These bizarre events deeply troubled him, and though he shared his fears with neighbors, he never contacted the police. On the night of March 31st, a killer struck the household. Forensic evidence later suggested that Andreas, his wife Cecilia, and their daughter Victoria, along with young Cecilia, were lured one by one into the coal barn and struck down with a mattock, a heavy farm tool similar to a pickaxe. Little 2-year-old Joseph and the new maid, Maria, were murdered in their beds. The ruthless attack suggested the killer knew the farm layout and the family routines. The lifeless bodies lay undiscovered until April 4th, 4 full days after the slaughter. Locals grew worried when the family missed Sunday church, and nobody from the farm showed up at the Monday market, as they always did. When a search party finally stepped onto the silent homestead, they discovered 4 bodies in the barn buried under hay, and the other 2 dead inside the house. What made this horrific crime truly chilling was clear evidence that the killer stayed at the farm for days before the bodies were found. The livestock was fed and watered, fires had been lit to keep the house warm, and food had been cooked and eaten in the kitchen. Neighbors even recalled seeing smoke drifting from the chimney during that time, showing someone was inside, living among the dead. Munich detectives took over the case, questioning more than 100 people and chasing down every lead. Unfortunately, the crime scene was heavily compromised before detectives arrived, as dozens of curious locals had already trampled through the barn and house. This chaos made it almost impossible to separate the killer's actual clues from the footprints of visitors. While fingerprinting technology existed in 1922, it was primitive compared to modern standards. The medical examiner determined that the heavy blows from the tool were delivered with terrifying, brutal force. The methodical order of the killings showed that the attacker knew the layout of the property and the family's nightly habits. One neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a former lover of Victoria's, quickly became a prime suspect. He had been part of the search party that found the bodies, but his strange behavior raised immediate red flags. He reportedly walked straight to where the victims lay hidden, without any guidance, hinting at dark prior knowledge. Furthermore, he was locked in a bitter paternity battle with Victoria over young Joseph. Though a modern inquiry in 2007 applied advanced forensic science, the final findings about the killer's identity and the family's genetic ties were never made public to protect the privacy of surviving descendants. Even recent scientific testing of old evidence has failed to solve the mystery, though it ruled out several long-held suspects. With a botched original investigation, ruined evidence, and more than a century gone by, justice will likely never be served. The ominous farm buildings were bulldozed in 1923, erasing the physical crime scene forever. Who could execute such a calculated slaughter? And what kind of monster stays behind in a house of horror? Decades later, in March 2018, a 30-year-old Polish stable hand named Mateusz Kawecki worked at a German facility. Originally from Poland, Mateusz was eagerly awaiting his first child with his girlfriend back home. With his baby's birth just days away, Mateusz planned to drive from Germany to Poland to witness the big moment. Friends described him as a responsible young man who was incredibly excited about becoming a father. On March 28, 2018, Mateusz left work in Germany and headed for Poland. He drove his Volkswagen Passat, texting his pregnant girlfriend along the way. His final message went out that evening. After that, his phone went completely dead. When he never arrived and his phone stayed silent, his panicked girlfriend finally reported him missing. Polish police launched a search, but checks at border crossings and along his route turned up nothing. Desperate, his family started their own hunt, plastering his face all over social media and local towns. Months dragged by without a single clue or any sign of his car. His girlfriend gave birth alone, while his family grew more desperate with each passing day. Then, in July 2018, 4 months after he vanished, the family made a horrifying discovery. Searching an old barn on family property in Hutkau, Poland, they stumbled upon his decomposing remains. The body was so badly decomposed that investigators could not immediately tell what had happened. Most disturbing of all, the victim's head was completely severed from the torso. However, coroners concluded this was just a natural result of the body hanging there for several months. The autopsy found no signs of a struggle or any evidence of foul play. Although there was no foreign DNA, the family pointed out something strange. 2 different nooses were found. This detail made them doubt the suicide ruling. The barn sat on land Mateusz knew, but he did not live there. His car was never found, throwing a massive wrench into the official theory. If he had driven himself to that barn, where was his Volkswagen Passat? Polish authorities officially ruled it a suicide, a decision that sparked instant outrage. The official police report stated, "The evidence points clearly to suicide." But this ruling met fierce resistance from his loved ones, who pointed out several massive inconsistencies. His family immediately questioned the physical scene. The severed head and severe decomposition made it nearly impossible to reconstruct his final moments. Some reports suggested wild animals might have mutilated the body after he died. Still, that theory did not explain everything found at the scene. His family stressed that Mateusz was thrilled to become a dad, showing zero signs of depression or worry. On top of that, witnesses reported seeing Mateusz in a car with another person around the time he vanished. His relatives wondered why the police never bothered to chase that lead. They also argued that while the barn sat on family land, it was not a place Mateusz would ever normally go, especially when rushing to see his newborn child. The dark questions surrounding his death still linger. Why did he detour to that isolated barn when his destination lay elsewhere? Where is his missing car? And who drove it away? And who was that passenger? His family refuses to give up, insisting the real truth remains buried. If you love uncovering the truth behind these bizarre and mysterious cases, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Next, we look at an intelligence spy whose bizarre death inside a locked bag baffled the world. Gareth Williams was born on September 26, 1978, in Wales. From childhood, he showed a mind-blowing talent for mathematics, entering Bangor University at just 15 to study math. By 17, he had graduated, moving on to Cambridge University for his postgraduate studies. His incredible genius soon caught the eye of British spy agencies, who quickly recruited him. He landed at GCHQ, the government communications headquarters, specializing in code breaking. His talent soon earned him a temporary transfer to MI6, Britain's secret service, placing him right inside their London headquarters. By August 2010, Williams was living in an MI6 safe house flat on Alderney Street in Pimlico, London. At 31, he lived quietly, keeping the deep secrets his job demanded. He was supposed to attend meetings at M16 headquarters but never showed up, highly unusual for such a punctual man. When his phone went unanswered and appointments were missed, silence triggered immediate alarm bells within the intelligence community. On August 23, 2010, police headed to Williams's apartment to conduct a welfare check. The officers arrived at the property and carefully forced their way inside. Stepping into the bathroom, they found Williams's body crammed inside a red North Face duffel bag sitting in the bathtub. The zipper was locked tight from the outside with a padlock, yet the key to that padlock lay inside the bag, trapped directly beneath his cold body. The apartment's heating was blasting, speeding up decomposition and making it nearly impossible to determine exactly when he died. The autopsy failed to find a definitive cause of death, as severe decay had masked any obvious clues. Toxicology tests were run, but the advanced decay masked any clear traces. What remained of his body showed absolutely no signs of physical struggle or trauma. There was no sign of a struggle inside the flat, and no defensive wounds. Experts believed he lay in that bag for 7 days before being found. The locked duffel bag became the absolute center of the mystery. Detectives desperately tried to figure out if anyone could actually lock themselves inside that space. The police recruited escape artists and professional contortionists to run experiments. They wanted to see if self-locking was possible. At first, everyone concluded it was completely impossible, but later, a retired army sergeant and a contortionist proved to the inquest that it was physically possible. They showed that, with extreme difficulty, someone could lock themselves inside that exact North Face duffel bag. Forensic sweeps of the flat turned up incredibly little evidence. No fingerprints besides Williams's own were recovered from the bag, padlock, or bathroom. This complete lack of third-party DNA or prints was striking, but still proved nothing. It could mean he was entirely alone, or that a killer was meticulous about leaving no trace. There were no signs of break-in, struggle, or even a minor disturbance. All of his personal belongings, including high-end electronics and mobile phones, lay completely untouched inside the home. In May 2012, Coroner Fiona Wilcox finally delivered her official findings. Having thoroughly analysed every piece of evidence, testimony, and expert opinion, Wilcox ruled that his death was criminally mediated, firmly believing another person was directly involved. She strongly emphasized that the physical evidence proved he could not have locked himself inside. Therefore, a second party had to have been present. However, the Metropolitan Police launched a fresh review in 2013 and reached a different conclusion. Investigators theorized he might have crawled inside as part of an activity that went tragic, despite admitting how highly unlikely that was. That 2013 review by Scotland Yard, backed up by later forensic audits, officially concluded the death was likely a tragic, solitary accident, overturning the coroner's murder theory. Our next case would tear a family apart in ways that defy comprehension: the Dardine murders. The Dardines lived in Ana, Illinois, a quiet, tight-knit community in Jefferson County. At 29 years old, Russell Keith Dardine earned a living operating a local water treatment plant. He sang beautifully in his church choir, completely devoted to his 30-year-old wife, Ruby Elaine, who worked nearby in an office. Together, they raised their 2-year-old son, Peter, and eagerly awaited their second baby, due in late November 1987. On November 17, 1987, Keith left for his scheduled night shift at the water plant. He worked all through the night, clocking off around 6 in the morning on November 18th. Keith then drove straight home to their trailer located just outside Ena. What waited for him inside would seal his tragic fate. When he failed to show up for work later, worried colleagues raised the alarm. This silent disappearance was entirely unlike the dependable man everyone knew. Officers were soon dispatched to perform a welfare check at the Dardine home. On November 18th, police discovered Keith's abandoned car parked at a hospital in Mount Vernon. Later that afternoon, they discovered his remains in a distant wheat field. He had been shot multiple times, and his body bore the horrific signs of extreme physical violence far beyond those bullet wounds. Inside the quiet mobile home, detectives discovered Ruby Elaine, young Peter, and a newborn baby girl. The crime scene was unbelievably brutal. Ruby had been bludgeoned with a baseball bat. The attack was so violent it forced her into labor, and the killer took the lives of all three. Strangely, there were no signs of forced entry anywhere at the scene. This meant Ruby likely let the killer inside, or the intruder had another way to enter without a struggle. There was no proof of assault, and the motive did not seem connected to anything of that nature. Valuables were left untouched inside, which quickly ruled out robbery as the killer's main motive. The sheer savagery of the attack pointed to pure, personal rage, or a deeply sick mind at work. Detectives worked to piece together the timeline. The physical evidence showed that the indoor attacks happened first, probably on the night of November 17th, or the early hours of November 18th. They believed Keith was ambushed upon arriving home, finding the horror before being shot outside. The killer used a baseball bat and a gun. Police questioned neighbors, co-workers, family members, and anyone who knew the Dardine family, but nobody recalled any threats, arguments, or strange behavior in the days before the tragedy. They had no known enemies, which left investigators with a completely baffling cold case. Then, in 2010, a convicted serial killer named Tommy Lynn Sells confessed to the crimes. Speaking from death row in Texas, Sells offered a confession packed with specific details. He claimed he was hitchhiking through Illinois in November 1987 when he found them, but his story had major holes. Joanne Dardine, Keith's mother, openly rejected his confession. She called out the massive gaps in his story and doubted he was the real killer. Detectives also realized that several details Sells shared did not match the physical evidence found at the scene. It turned out Sells had a long history of confessing to horrific crimes he never actually committed, usually stealing details from news reports or other gossip. With no physical evidence tying Sells to the home and too many contradictions, police could not believe him. Tommy Lynn Sells was executed in Texas in April 2014, taking whatever secrets he actually possessed straight to his grave. Whether he was truly responsible for the horrific crime or simply told another lie remains unknown. The case file is still wide open, with no suspects and no arrests. But as we will see, this terror was nothing compared to what haunted Michigan for years. The Oakland County Child Killings. Between February 15th, 1976 and March 16th, 1977, a wave of terror paralyzed Oakland County, Michigan. 4 young children vanished from quiet neighborhoods, only to be discovered dead days later. The predator, known as the Oakland County Child Killer, was never identified, despite DNA clues and witness tips over the decades. Then, Mark Stebbins vanished on February 15th, 1976. He was last seen leaving a movie at a local hall in Ferndale. 4 days later, they found his body in a parking lot. Evidence showed he had been held captive during those 4 agonizing days. He was kept clean and well fed before being placed outside. His clothing was neatly arranged, and the scene showed absolutely no signs of a struggle. Then, Jill Robinson vanished on December 22nd, 1976, after a fight with her mother. She rode away on her bicycle, planning to run far from home. 4 days later, drivers found her body along Interstate 75 in Troy. Just like Mark, Jill had been held alive the entire time, and she was clearly cared for before being left on the roadside. Her bicycle was discovered close by, indicating the killer had carefully moved both the girl and her bike to the location. Next, Christine Mahik disappeared on January 2nd, 1977, while walking home from a Berkeley store after buying a magazine. 19 days later, her frozen body was discovered in a snowbank in Franklin Village. This longer period of captivity fit the killer's chilling and deliberate pattern, and once again, evidence showed she had been fed and kept clean. The victims' clothes were freshly washed, showing the killer took disturbing care of them in captivity. Meanwhile, young Timothy King vanished on March 16, 1977, right after leaving a Birmingham hobby shop where he bought modelling supplies. 6 days later, his body was discovered in a Livonia ditch. Timothy's case held a truly chilling detail. His final meal was fried chicken, after his mother had begged him on television to come home for his favourite dinner, Kentucky Fried Chicken. This sparked grim theories that the predator was actively mocking the family. Just like previous victims, his clothes were clean, and his body showed signs of meticulous care during captivity. This unsettling pattern remained identical across all 4 cases. Every child was held for days, bathed, fed, and then carefully left in plain sight to be found. None of them were hidden, suggesting the killer wanted their bodies to be discovered. It pointed to a highly organized suspect with a secure holding space and the chilling patience to groom these kids before taking their lives. Police drew up composite sketches from witness accounts of strange cars and suspicious people hanging around the abduction sites. Several witnesses recalled seeing a dark blue AMC Gremlin near Timothy King's abduction spot. Chillingly, that same model of car was spotted where Mark Stevens' body was dumped, tying the vehicle to the start and end of this nightmare. Physical evidence swept from the bodies included stray hair samples that did not belong to the victims, leaving behind DNA profiles that would prove vital decades later. A prime suspect named Christopher Bush drew intense focus. He had a dark criminal past and lived right in Oakland County during the murders. Bush died in 1978, though his family has actively challenged the official cause of death. Personal items belonging to Mark Stebbins were reportedly found among his belongings. Investigators also looked at Gregory Green, an associate of Bush who ended up dying in prison in 2012. Detectives aggressively questioned Green about the Oakland County murders, but charges were never filed. Another of Bush's associates, Theodore Lamborghini, was closely scrutinized. He had a long criminal record and was serving a life sentence for other crimes. Detectives interviewed him multiple times regarding the Oakland County cold cases, but he never offered anything to resolve them. The most heavily scrutinized suspect of all was Arch Sloan, who faced relentless interrogation during the initial manhunt. Records show that Sloan repeatedly failed polygraph tests when pressed about the murders. Though lie detector results cannot be used in court, Sloan died in the early 2000s without ever facing charges, but in 2012, DNA from a hair on Timothy King's clothes matched Archibald Sloan, though this only proved physical contact and did not offer enough evidence to secure a posthumous murder conviction. Stray hairs left on several victims pointed directly to a single source, strongly supporting a lone killer theory. Yet, the killer's DNA profile still matches no one in the national databases. Police have considered whether they are hunting a group rather than a lone actor. This level of planning required serious coordination and resources. While dark theories connect the various suspects, no hard evidence has ever backed them up. After Timothy King in March 1977, no more victims matching this horrific pattern were ever found in Oakland County. Whether the monster moved away, went to prison, died, or simply stopped remains a mystery. This active investigation remains open as the sheriff's office continues to analyze cold case files. But while families reeled from this calculated terror, another tragedy proved that danger often hides closest to home. Take 41-year-old Eric Tamyasu. He lived in Parkdale, Oregon, a quiet town nestled in the scenic Columbia River Gorge. He was a local consultant, widely known for his warm and friendly personality. Eric shared a tight bond with local resident Diana Anderson, both of them sharing business ventures. But on the night of October 1st, 2001, Eric sat in his home, completely alone. On October 4th, he was found dead in bed. It was a modest, one-story house where he had lived alone, valuing his quiet independence while keeping tight bonds with his nearby family. In the pitch-black hours of October 14th, an intruder crept inside and shot Eric directly in his bed. 3 bullets struck him. The brutal attack caught him completely off guard, asleep or resting in his own bedroom. When detectives finally discovered Eric's body, they found absolutely no signs of forced entry. Every door and window was untouched, no pry marks, no broken glass, and the locks were completely intact. This dark detail meant either Eric welcomed his killer inside, or the shooter possessed a house key, or perhaps a door was simply left unlocked. The crime scene stayed mostly confined to the bedroom. Soon, the Hood River County Sheriff's Office took the lead on the mystery. Detectives processed the quiet house, collecting evidence, bagging the spent bullets and hunting for any trace of the killer. But a major blow struck the case. Before police arrived, a person of interest washed the bloody bedding in Eric's washing machine, erasing crucial DNA. The mystery of how that bedding ended up burned became a massive flashpoint in the police investigation. Several people fell under suspicion, including Diana Anderson, a close friend whom detectives questioned for hours. Whispers suggested their friendship was turning into something far more intimate, though no one could say for sure. Anderson cooperated fully and faced no charges. Even the local sheriff, Joe Cuppins, suddenly found himself under a harsh spotlight. Rumors swirled about an affair between Cuppins and Diana, fueling wild theories about a motive. Cuppins denied it all and cooperated with external investigators. Motives ranged from messy personal betrayals to hidden financial secrets. Some believed Eric was mixed up in business deals that bred dangerous enemies, but no specific clashes were ever found. A potential love triangle was explored, but concrete evidence never materialized. That undisturbed front door remains the most chilling clue in the case. It points to someone Eric trusted enough to open his door for, or a killer who already had a key. Because he was shot right in his own bed, he clearly sensed no immediate danger, either because he trusted his visitor or never heard them slip inside. Today, the mystery remains unsolved on the Hood River Sheriff's active list. Our final mystery takes us from that quiet bedroom to a dense jungle, where 2 best friends vanished without a trace. Chris Kremers, 21, and Lizanne Froon, 22, were Dutch best friends who travelled to Panama in March 2014. The 2 students had saved up for months to volunteer and work with local communities in Boquete. Chris studied cultural social work, while Lizanne focused on applied psychology. On April 1st, 2014, they set out to hike the famous Pianista Trail near Boquete. It was a well-known route for tourists, though some steep sections could get treacherous. Locals spotted the women starting their hike around 11 a.m., smiling and in high spirits. But when they failed to return by nightfall, their worried host family sounded the alarm. Search parties scrambled immediately, with volunteers and authorities combing the dense, surrounding jungle. Despite deploying search teams and helicopters, they found absolutely no trace of the girls. 10 weeks after they vanished, in June 2014, a local woman discovered a blue backpack resting along the banks of the Culebra River, miles past where the trail ended. Bizarrely, the pack was in pristine condition, despite sitting out in the wild for over 2 months. Inside, investigators recovered both of their cell phones, a camera, cash, and private belongings. Incredibly, the electronics still worked, giving detectives a direct window into their final days. Examining the phones soon revealed a terrifying and systematic pattern. On April 1st, just hours after they started hiking, desperate emergency calls were made from both devices. They repeatedly dialed 911 and the European emergency line, 112. But with zero cell signal in the deep jungle, not a single call went through. This heartbreaking pattern continued for days, with the phones being turned on briefly just to search for a signal. It was then shut off, likely to save battery. Inside, the digital camera held photos tracking the women's hike. Pictures from April first captured Chris and Leanne at different spots along the trail. Everything seemed normal until the images showed them pushing past the usual turnaround point. The last daytime shot, snapped at 1:33 in the afternoon, captured a spot deep where few hikers ever dared to go. What came next was deeply unsettling. For over a week, the camera stayed dark. Then, between 1 and 4 a.m. on April 8th, 99 photos were suddenly taken, though one crucial frame was completely missing from the digital files. Most of these night shots showed only pitch-black jungle, but photo 580 revealed a chilling close-up of the back of Chris's head, her hair looking clean and dry, despite the brutal jungle environment. The sequence suggested someone was firing the flash to light their path, or desperately trying to signal for help. A few frames captured strange markers made of branches and stones, perhaps left as distress signals. Months after the backpack was recovered, searchers made a grim discovery of human remains. They found a hiking boot belonging to Leanne, with her foot still inside it. Autopsy reports revealed multiple broken foot bones, an injury that pointed to a severe fall, perhaps from one of the sketchy monkey bridges over the river. More fragments from both women were slowly recovered along the river, but the scattered, chaotic state of these remains quickly sparked a fierce debate about what actually happened. Medical examiners noted that the bones were severely decayed and strangely white, as if bleached. Some specialists blamed natural jungle decomposition, but others argued this whitening happened far too quickly to be natural. There were no clear marks of violence found on the recovered bones, though having only small fragments made a complete forensic study nearly impossible. Panamanian authorities ultimately ruled that the two hikers simply lost their way, suggesting they pushed past the safe zone and grew completely disoriented in the deep brush. According to this theory, they could not find their way back to safety, eventually dying from the harsh elements, starvation, or severe injuries. Police saw the nighttime photos as desperate distress signals or attempts to light the dark, yet critical details continue to fuel darker, alternative theories. Investigators noted gaps in the camera's file numbers, hinting that someone might have deleted key photos. Of course, this could just be a simple glitch or an accidental button press. The fact that their backpack remained almost spotless after 10 weeks in the wet jungle raised major red flags. Still, some argued that being swept down a river might actually preserve certain items. Refusing to let it go, the girls' families hired private experts to examine the evidence. They openly challenged the official police story, demanding a far deeper investigation into the tragedy. Even in 2025, the mystery kept drawing intense media coverage, though real answers remain entirely out of reach. That wraps up today's investigation. Thanks for watching, and join us next time as we dig into another mystery.